Okay, so what is integral Judaism? I have to say it probably doesn't really exist other than, you know, as a concept that we may be developing here now. But if I were to describe it or explain it, I'd say integral Judaism is a synthesis of Jewish mysticism, humanism, and the science of meditation and mindfulness. It builds upon the principles and practice of Mussar, which many of us are familiar with, by adding a spiritual component that works for people who believe in God, as well as those who don't believe in God. This three-part series will cover the theory and practice of integral Judaism, demonstrating how it can enrich not only one's approach to Mussar and Jewish spirituality, but I hope to life in general. So I want to just play a quick video from a teacher of mine, and many of you, he is a teacher for as well.
Being in Cincinnati, I've come to read a lot about Thomas Merton.
I'll get back to that. I just saw today Mr. Rabbi Heyn.
Oh,
Tom Heyn.
Your assistant just told me that Tom Heyn was here.
Yeah.
I've met Tom a few times. And
He's a good person. Hang out with him. He could also use someone with whom he can talk about Torah and integral.
You know, I'll reach out to him. I told you I tried to start this kirtan with Van Sean and Boy and other people, and we were trying to get Tom into it.
Okay, so he knows from stuff like that. Okay, so that's good.
Right, so let's see how I can continue this. Okay, there we go. So what are the ways in which integral has been used in a spiritual context? First of all, here's the meaning of the word: necessary to make a whole, complete, essential or fundamental. It's been used in the context of learning. It's related to the word integrity, but it's more of a holistic process, really, through which integrity is reached or achieved. It was used in the spiritual context first by Sri Aurobindo, an Indian, Hindu teacher of yoga. He taught that the current status of human evolution is an intermediate stage in the unfolding of the spirit and the self-revelation of divinity in all things. Integral yoga would accelerate the evolutionary process, which otherwise takes many centuries or many births for a human being to reach the highest stages in the evolution of consciousness. Today, there is a Sri Aurobindo Society with centers around the world, and its headquarters are in Auroville in India. The California Institute of Integral Studies is an institution here in San Francisco, and our own past president of the Coastside Jewish community, Chip Goldstein, is the, what's your title, Chip? The rector or?
Associate Provost.
Associate Provost of the California Institute of Integral Studies.
And it's my alma mater.
Oh, no kidding. All right.
That's how Chip got to know about it. I got my expressive arts therapy certificate, and then eventually my registration with the International Expressive Arts Therapy through CIIS, yes.
No kidding. Well, I just want to mention here that it has its historical roots among followers of Sri Aurobindo and Alan Watts and other great thinkers. Integral yoga was also a term used by Swami Satchidananda Saraswati, who formed his own approach to yoga that he called integral yoga. And he also has a large following, and he has an Integral Yoga Institute of San Francisco and many other centers around the world. Integral theory was a term that might have been coined by Ken Wilber, and he was strongly influenced by Aurobindo. He was attempting to develop a theory of everything, to synthesize Eastern religious traditions with Western developmental psychology. The Integral Institute is now Integral Life, offering online courses in affinity groups. So here's his definition of integral theory. I think it's important to know. And I know I'm moving quickly, so I hope I'll pause a few times just to take some questions, just to make sure I still have people with me. Integral theory is a way of knowing that helps foster the recognition that disparate aspects of reality are all critically important to any quest for knowledge. Integral theory provides a framework that simultaneously honors the important contributions of a broad spectrum of outlooks, while also acknowledging the parochial limits of each. In other words, integral theory affords a perspective that allows us to situate diverse fields and approaches in such a way that they synergistically complement rather than contradict one another. So that's what I'll be attempting to do with integral Judaism. Now, integral halakha is a term that was used by Reb Zalman, and he co-authored a book on the subject. And one really key idea in integral theory, integral halakha, integral Judaism, is a concept that we can transcend and include other levels within or, earlier, prior levels of development as we grow and evolve. Now, integral Judaism is a term that was used, or it still is used, by a Jewish teacher who was once a rabbi, who is followed by accusations of sexual abuse for many years. He developed the idea of integral Judaism and integral wisdom, but because he's been preoccupied with defending himself against allegations from dozens of women, he has a relatively small following, which is a good thing. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that what we're developing here has nothing to do with Mark Gaffney and his teachings. So why does this matter? I'm reminded of a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. "Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." And so even though there are many paths and all of them have been traveled, and I don't think I'm really forging a new path, I do feel like I hope to leave a trail because of my deep interest in the subject. Regardless of whether or not I'm able to communicate it effectively, I believe that it has intrinsic value, and I hope to continue to go deeper into it. And if at some point somebody wonders, where did he go? At least now you'll know. I was going to share a clip by Eliana Light. Listen shared it with me earlier. Just as she talks about her own, thoughts about God and how we can, open that up to all kinds of possibilities. But in the interest of time, I'll save that for another time. So a couple of influences that have been important to me because of my different spiritual identities and philosophies that I've studied and embraced. I'm not entirely theistic in my orientation. I don't, belief in a deity or a creator God or the traditional concepts of God in Judaism, I'm not as comfortable with as other approaches, perhaps, mystical or humanistic approaches. And you might say, well, what does humanism have to do with spirituality? Of course, there's secular humanism, but many people don't know there are also forms of religious humanism, where we might be primarily humanists insofar as I believe that we are all fundamentally human and we share that in common. But then secondary to that, we might choose to express ourselves in different ways, religious or otherwise. Another thing that's really important to me, a principle, is the idea that truth is universal. What is. And I think about this in the context of my Alzheimer's patients as a hospice chaplain. I see many, many people with Alzheimer's at all different stages. I might even be in an early stage myself. And I realized that at some point, it's quite possible that we'll lose our cognitive abilities. But does that mean that we lose our connection to what is on the deepest levels? I would say no. And I would say in my own case, I hope to develop and strengthen that connection to what is on the deepest levels, so that even if I do lose my cognitive abilities, I'll still be able to be deeply connected. We'll talk about that more later. I also mentioned that, we could die at any time. And so I feel that the purpose of my life is to be a seeker of truth. And I hope that, I'm able to accomplish that, at least to some degree, before the end of my life. Now, in my background in an ashram where I spent about 10 years, I learned a great deal about yoga. And many people might think of yoga as a form of exercise or stretching, but there are actually 4 paths, and the physical or stretching part of it is only one. The 4 paths can be summarized as that of jnana yoga, the path of self-knowledge; Raja Yoga, the path of discipline, which includes movement and stretching and other forms of pursuing excellence. Bhakti Yoga is the path of devotion, and Karma Yoga is the path of action or good deeds. And all of these paths are equally valid and important. Whereas in Judaism, we might find there seems to be an emphasis on devotion and prayer and devotion to God. That in India and in Hinduism and in yoga, that's only one of several paths. But what is the goal of yoga? I'd say it's the identification of the Atman, the self, the self with a capital S, and identifying that with Brahman, which is the universal self, the cosmic consciousness that encompasses the universe. It's formless and beyond time and space. And so that connection with something that's deep within us is connected to something that is beyond everything. Some might describe that as a process or an achievement of self-realization or self-actualization, of awakening, nirvana, or absorption. In Sanskrit, that's called samadhi, and in Judaism, or in Hebrew, it's called dveikut, which we'll talk about more later. What does it mean to actualize one's potential, and how is it done? Actualization is a term that might have been coined by Abraham Maslow, who gave us this hierarchy of needs, which really makes good sense. And once we are able to take care of everything else, self-actualization is the final goal or the highest achievement of human life. But how is it done and what does it mean? I believe it has something to do with changing your mind or perspective. There are many things that we can do in the world, many things that we should do. Acts of kindness, acts of tikkun olam, repairing the world. But there are also mystical dimensions to our life. Or we could say, if you don't believe in mystical dimensions, at least subjective experiences. And changing the way you think has a very important role to play in our own evolution and in the evolution of consciousness. Meditating can change your subjective experience. There are even, psychotropic substances like psilocybin and LSD that give people, mind-opening experiences that can be life-changing. Michael Pollan wrote a book about it, and it's a really great book. And there's a great deal of research now that's being done on LSD and other psychedelics that can elicit in people what might be called religious experiences that they later can integrate into their daily lives and thereby evolve themselves and grow as spiritually. I want to mention my own story insofar as I connected many years ago with a bhakti saint, a devotional saint from India, who was, I believe, a 16th century. No, you know what? I think it was a 17th century saint. And many people have heard of Rumi, the Sufi poet, but not many people have heard of Tukaram. Tukaram was a saint who is really well known in India and highly respected. Some say that he went up in a chariot, went straight to heaven, but the truth is around the age of 42, he disappeared. So people might have presumed he was taken up in a chariot, but others say he might have been killed by the establishment, the priests of the established caste system and the Brahmins, because he really was a threat to, established religion. He, like the Baal Shem Tov, brought religion to the common folk. And his primary practice was the recitation of God's name and his intense faith in Krishna, or an incarnation of Vishnu, which is really, as is known in India, as just a manifestation of the formless Brahman. I'll have more to say about Tukaram, but one of my goals in life is to become a Jewish Tukaram. I'm going to take a break and answer some questions in just a couple minutes. I'll just get through this next section. There are mythological elements in all religions. In India, just like the idea about Tukaram going up in a chariot to heaven, that's a mythological element. The idea that, that Brahman could incarnate as a god or a goddess, those are mythological elements. Even in Judaism, there are mythological elements, such as God as being a deity, as talking to Moses or Abraham, of God being a vengeful deity of watching over the people. The idea that God is a judge or a ruler or king, all these could be called mythological elements. And I use the word myth not to denigrate them, because we could call it a category of sacred myth, but it's not what we might regard as scientific truths. Now, I want to say what's really interesting in Hinduism is that there is the path of Jnana Yoga, which could be completely free of any mythological elements. And then there's Bhakti Yoga, which could involve many elements, mythological elements with gods and goddesses and propitiating them and so forth. But the Jnana Yogi, the one who achieves enlightenment or liberation through the path of self-knowledge, knows that it's not right to denigrate those who practice the path of bhakti, of devotion. And so they've always been very tolerant of the mythological elements in their own religion, knowing that they are just manifestations of what is ultimately beyond any manifestation. There are mythological elements in Buddhism. You see on the left, there are many deities and gods and goddesses, but then you see on the right, a Zen monk. And in Zen, that's a form of Buddhism that abolishes all mythology. It's like it's a clean slate. There's no mythology there. And so it's pretty sparse, one could say. We could imagine Zen Judaism, perhaps, and it wouldn't be too far off to imagine something like that, because it already exists in some ways, and there are many books that talk about the connections between Buddhism and Judaism. But what I'm developing here, I wouldn't call Zen Judaism, because Zen really has a particular style and a very austere kind of feeling to it. Whereas Integral Judaism is much more inclusive and universal. Okay, we're going to come back to this in a little while, but I want to see everybody and say hi and know that you're out there. Any comments or questions so far? Go
I
ahead.
was surprised by your statement of, I don't remember it exactly, but something like there's a universal truth. What is, because many people would argue with that. And increasingly, it seems in our world, even more so than I can ever recall in my lifetime, there are people who say, no, there are many different truths. And can you say a little more about that, Moshe?
Sure, that's a really good question. In the religion of Jainism, they have a very useful concept called anekantavada, which means that there is one universal truth that is comprised of many, many partial truths. And that, so, you know, everyone may have their own experience of truth, but if we put them all together, we would have what we could call a universal truth, something that we all share in common. So that's why I think an integral approach is so valuable, is because it considers many different perspectives. This is very different from like a zealot saying my truth is the truth. Very different from that. Any other comments?
Thank you. That helps me to understand it. Although religion in general would say we have the proper truth, right?
That's true. I'm very suspicious of truth claims. Vaughn.
So you're saying that in Jainism there is no absolute truth over and above human beings' subjective ideas of truth?
No, I wouldn't say that even. I would say that there is an ultimate truth, but it's really beyond our understanding. I'd say it's very much akin to Brahman. You know, it's non-dual. It's beyond. So there are, you know, versions of that in different religions. In Judaism, we might call it Ein Sof, you know, endless, boundless. But, you know, then one could understand that in reality, there are different levels of understanding. That's the ultimate level. But then there, you know, you come down from that and there are different understandings. But I think they all of what we understand, whether we're Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, Sufi, Sikh, we all have perspectives on that truth. You know, it's like the metaphor of the elephant and the blind men that came to feel it. And one got hold of the trunk and said, oh, the elephant is like this big fire hose. Another felt the tail and said, no, the elephant is like a whisk broom. And the other felt the leg and say, no, it's like a stout tree trunk. And the other said, no, the elephant is like this big balloon. So they're all arguing their own truth claims, but there really is only one truth. Any other comments, questions? All right. I hope I still have you with me because I'm going to forge ahead and then we'll bring it in for a landing. Okay? I'm going to share my screen again. Here we go.
I thought we were going to have a break.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just a break for questions. Do you need a break?
Oh, well, I need a break for a break. I'll be
Okay.
back then.
All right, go ahead. Any other comments, questions before we move forward? Okay. In most religious traditions, meditation plays a role. And most meditation practices are closely linked to the breath. Some are linked to a mantra or a repetitive sound or word. But I want to say that underneath these practices, there are also explicit or implicit assumptions or principles in underlying framework. So for example, mindfulness there's really been an attempt to bring it out of its religious framework and set it into a clinical framework that's devoid of any kind of religious elements. And one could say that it's done that pretty successfully. But most mindfulness practices have their roots in some form of Buddhism, probably Vipassana, a form of meditation. And so that carries with it some of the implicit assumptions or principles of Buddhism, which are great, and I love Buddhism. But I think it's possible to develop a meditation practice that has at its core a Jewish flavor, a Jewish framework. And so that's what I hope to develop in what I'm calling Integral Judaism. Now, there are three types of meditation. One is when you focus on something. You know, our minds typically wander, and so it helps to bring it back to a thought or an object of our attention. Another form of meditation is just open awareness, just letting what crosses your mind, let it cross your mind, and any sensory experiences, let them come and go. And then there's just an effortless presence, which I'm not, to be honest, not really sure how that's different from open awareness, but I'm sure somebody could explain that to me. But I wanted to point out that there's really the difference between just noticing what is or focusing one's mind on something. For myself, my preference is to focus on something because my mind tends to wander too much, and it takes me a while to notice that. Now, one thing that's very common for people to focus on is a name, a sacred name or a word. In India, there's Om, or there's the names for God, Rama, Gandhi. That seemed to have been his mantra. That seems to be what he said just before he died. Hare Krishna, all these different sacred syllables and sacred names. That's true in Hinduism as well as in Sikhism. There's something called Satnam, which is the name and the word has great significance to Sikhs who practice meditation. Sufism, if you recall the poetry of Rumi and Sufis, and there was much cross-pollination between the Eastern religions and Judaism that might have given rise to Sufism. I guess Sufism is actually the mystical form of Islam. And then there's a great deal of Jewish thought and practice around the name, which is the name of God. Here is one of many, many representations of what we could call a shiviti. This is something that's usually designed that has all kinds of contemplative words, prayers, sayings, verses, and at the center of it is God's name. This is another version of it. And you can see at the top here, it says, Shiviti Rebavhe Lenegdi Tamid. I keep before me this name always. Now, one can interpret that to mean that I keep the name before me always, or maybe I keep the remembrance of God or what that name represents before me always. It's somewhat ambiguous, but we see here that there's great significance to this four-letter name and to its a repetition, its remembrance, bringing it to mind and all that it represents. And what it represents could be a lot of different things to a lot of people. I'd say God, and Reb Zalman used an exclamation mark instead of a dash when he wrote it, represents an experience that we interpret. If you look at this picture, you'll see that it depends on your perspective, how you see something. You might see it as a cylinder from one perspective, or as a circle in another perspective, or as a square from another perspective. The same could be said for these other shapes, whether it's a triangle or a circle. So a similar experience can be interpreted in many ways. Also, there could be a function of the different hemispheres of the brain. We have an analytical aspect of the brain and a more artistic or creative side of the brain. Jill Bolte-Taylor, if anyone's seen her TED Talk or seen her book, she was a neurologist who had a stroke in the left hemisphere of her brain, which pretty much shut it down. And her experience was pretty much determined by the right hemisphere of her brain, which gave her just an intensely creative and open experience, almost like a psychedelic experience. And so it really points out the functionality of the different hemispheres of our brain and how they could play a role in religion. So I'm going to wrap it up here with a question for us to consider and to discuss. What would or what does integral Judaism look like? I have to say that actually it already exists. It's not something we're creating. It exists in many, many communities of practice, in many Reform communities, really every denomination, and I think especially in the Jewish renewal movement, where meditation has really been embraced, and all forms of Jewish meditation have been developed. So I'm much indebted to the work of Reb Zalman and other teachers in the Jewish renewal movement. And I would even say that the practice of Mussar is a good example of integral Judaism, because it works for people who believe in God, and it works just as well for people who don't believe in God. I think that was the experience of many in our own community, where we had groups of people studying Chavruta, studying Mussar. It's like an ethical mindfulness practice. And it's one very important aspect of it is the fellowship that is formed and the way in which we're able to process our experience with the help of study and discussion in smaller groups. And so I'd say integral Judaism exists all over the place. We might actually see it everywhere. And Jewish meditation is so widespread now. It's really come into the mainstream. Beginning with the work of Aryeh Kaplan, probably 20, 30, maybe 50 years ago. And, now many other great teachers have brought it into the mainstream. There are many more I could mention here. These are just a few. And many of us have our own experience of meditation. And so one could call that integral just as well. So I'd like to have, we're going to break up into smaller groups for a little breakout room in groups of 4. And I want to use these questions as prompts to really consider what I've been discussing. And I think it has a lot to do with experience. So the first question is, what are some of the most meaningful and or memorable experiences you've had while alone? A solitary experience, or maybe, with a friend or someone, it doesn't have to be completely solitary, but not in a group experience. What is the most meaningful and or memorable experience or experiences that you've had that you can remember? And then if you have time for the second question, what are some of the most meaningful and or memorable experiences you've had in or with a community of practice? In a synagogue or an ashram, a meditation group, something in a group setting. I will, I'm not sure I'm able to, I might be able to paste those in the chat for you to remember. Let me just go to that screen and find it. Let's see, I think it's way down at the bottom, and then I'm gonna have you go into your different groups. Any questions or comments before we do that, though? Go ahead. Anyway,
Yeah, I have a question, Moshe. How long will we be in the small group?
15 minutes. All right, so does that work for everyone? Okay, so we've got about, we'll do about 4 groups because there might be a few people who just checked out and might not be here. So I'm going to do 4 groups, and you know, some groups might have 4 or 5. So we'll be back together in 15 minutes. I'll try to post the questions in the chat, but hopefully you'll remember what's the most meaningful or memorable experience you've had by yourself and then with a group. Ready, go. Are you able to join?
Hey, Dad.
Yeah.
Hey, it looks I can't tell. Am I in your breakout room?
I don't think we have our own breakout room, don't we? I'm not sure Julie is actually here or not, so it might just be you and me.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So yeah, I got your text.
Yeah, a little bit crazy. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have sent that though, especially during your presentation.
Well, yeah, that's okay. But yeah. Anyway, I know I've talked about it with people in my community, and some of them know. So, and some of them are experiencing the same thing.
By the way, I just realized that I don't know if all breakout rooms are recorded, but we're probably still in the recorded room.
I think you and I are being recorded right now. That's right. None of the other groups are being recorded.
Okay, that's fine. Here,
Yeah.
I guess I should keep my camera off, but.
Yeah. So anyway, and I don't know if anybody's going to watch this recording anyway, so I wouldn't worry about it. But anyway, what do you think? Any comments, questions, feedback?
I'm enjoying. I think it's very cool that you're going through like the history of integral theory in general. I would have been interested, I think, to learn more about Ken Wilber's stuff.
Yeah.
Because just because that is, I never actually knew that there were like Hindu teachers who taught about integral theory before. Everything I've heard was just from you talking about Ken Wilber.
Yeah.
And I would have been interested to hear more about what his theories were and like why they were so groundbreaking. And that might have helped me understand what exactly Judaism would be, as opposed like what would make it especially unique, or what would make it also groundbreaking, or if integral Judaism is not even meant to be based on Ken Wilber's integral theory.
You know, that's a good question, and I'm not even really sure if I'm creating anything, or I think I might just be putting a label on something that otherwise I'm not sure there's a label for it.
Yeah.
You know, I think if I were trying to describe, you know, how I approach Judaism, I think it would just be, it's like an integral approach. And if anybody knows what that means, they get it.
Right. So in that case, I wonder if teaching like what is an integral approach might be helpful as well.
Yeah.
I personally am interested. I'd love to know more about what Ken Wilber taught about. It might just be because I was raised by you and you talk a lot about him, but I'm personally, that's like one thing that I would love to hear more about.
Right. Well, I guess, I could have gone in so many different directions.
Totally.
I created this, progression of thought, and I followed it. And I think I'm right on time here.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll have a lot of discussion after this, because that's really the most important part. I really fear that I was moving so quickly through this material, and it was such a lecture and such an easy thing for people to just zone out or be bored,
So they're after the breakout rooms.
What's that?
Is the discussion after the breakout
Yeah,
rooms?
yeah. We're gonna, how it's important to do kind of a group share, come back, and so people can really share what their groups. It gives them, people are a little bit afraid to speak up and ask their questions, but if they're representing a group, or at least the smaller groups stimulate the discussion.
Right.
So I think that'll be really important.
So one question was, what's a powerful experience you had in solitude?
Yeah, I mean, just not in a group, just whether it's by yourself or with a friend, or can you think of a memorable or meaningful experience?
Yeah, Devin's in the room, so she's heard this so much, but when I was in Baltimore for an internship in early college, I even remember texting you at one point that I was like, I understand what Taoism is about now, where it was definitely heavily influenced from drinking a lot of coffee, but I noticed how I was constantly, all of my thoughts were around creating systems for myself. I was at a grocery store and trying to figure out what to get for dinner. And I was thinking, okay, I should get this because this is this much protein and I need this much protein, and I should get this because of carbohydrates. But then like financially I should get this. And then I decided, what, I just like, there's no reason to follow any system right now. So I just got like a tuna sandwich and ate it on the curb, and then walked to the bus stop and took a bus back to my house. And I think being aware of that thought of not having to systematize everything, and then also having a lot of caffeine in my system, but being so aware of how beautiful that day was. Like, it was a really beautiful day. It was golden hour, so everything looked especially beautiful. I was listening to music I really liked on the bus. I was just extremely present. Like, I just somehow slipped outside of those systematizing thoughts, and just had like a very, very direct experience of life. And it felt like everything is exactly how it needs to be. I felt like I was being guided by life itself. I felt like when I was defining what was me, it was actually like the life inside of me that I shared with the trees around me and the nature around me. It wasn't like the usual my mind me.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's probably a very similar experience to what a lot of mystics experience at maybe like a lower level. And ever since then, I've been trying to get back to that mindset.
Very cool. I never heard that story.
Yeah. I remember texting you that day and saying something about Taoism.
Cool.
Yeah.
I might vaguely remember that, and I always
right, but that would be so small in your memory because that's such a small part of it.
Right. Wow. So now that's a really cool experience. Now help me think, when we come out of these groups, where do I go with this? I mean, how is that experience that you had? What does that have to do with what we're discussing tonight?
So I think what it has to do is that there is this deeper experience that there's like a dimension in our lives that most people are unaware of, but it's always there underneath our everyday experience. And many people often spontaneously tap into it. But the way, like, the frameworks that already exist in our minds, so like the religions that we believe, our belief systems, whether we're even religious or not, totally changes how we interpret that. So like a Christian mystic would interpret that as an experience of God or something like that. And I don't know how like a non-religious person would experience that. They might just think maybe they would become religious after that or become spiritual. Yeah. And so it seems like what this integral theory is talking about, or what you showed with like the image of the different shapes, is that there is like this raw experience that we impose our own beliefs on, and that becomes like religion.
Yes. Right.
And I guess maybe what you're trying to do, I don't know if this is it, is trying to get as close to that pure experience without having to have structures around it. Like that's what Zen is, I
Right.
guess.
Right. That's it. Another way to say it might be to get really close to that experience of Brahman, or the emptiness, in Buddhism, and or of Ein Sof, and to be able to just be there without all the layers or interpretations or ideas that are typically associated with that. So like I associate that like the name, the 4-letter name, for me represents that state, that it's like a portal into that dimension.
Yeah, it's like,
And if I were to fall into that, I don't know, it's a state that is so open on all sides to all different perspectives. I'm not even sure what to make of this yet, but I'm still processing it. But I think you said it better than I did even.
yeah. And maybe what you're fascinated by with the state, with the name, is that is like how you represent that pure experience. And that's why it's so important that you don't say the name, or that you like it is not pronounceable.
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing, the other thing is that 4-letter name, I would like to extract that from the concepts that we have about God. We call it Adonai, but I think that already puts a frame on it. You know what I mean? I'd like it to be like, that it's a word that's devoid. It's like it's associated with Ein Sof.
Right.
I don't know how to say it. I don't know. But what I'm going to do is, in this course in the next week, propose that people meditate on this 4-letter name. And people who aren't theistic, who don't believe in it and believe in God, that's fine. It could be just, symbol, sounds or syllables, But I think that's, boom, that implants in this practice a deep, deep Jewish foundation. It goes back before any concepts of that, what that name represents. I think that connects us to the roots of Judaism. I don't know. I'm not, anything I say about it just isn't quite right.
Maybe that's why you can't pronounce.
Anyway, I think you're getting it. I think you get to where I'm pointing, at least. And I hope that other people do in such a way that might develop some kind of synergy.
Well, it seems like what you have right now with what you started with Mussar is a great start.
Yeah.
And
okay.
One last.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say one last thing to say that might not directly related to the course, but I told Devin this before, and I don't think I got the chance to tell you this, which is that I've said that being raised by you is like giving me such a boost, such a spiritual boost. Like instead of starting my spiritual journey when I'm like 19, like so many people do, or like, early 20s, I started my spiritual journey when I was like 5, meditating with you in the basement. And I feel like that's definitely made me who I am. And I feel like at least I have a much better understanding of spirituality from that, and that I'm on a good spiritual path. I'm well set on a spiritual path from the way you brought me up.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast today, and some guy was interviewing a woman who, in her bio, it says she's been meditating since she was 13.
That's enough.
She's a pretty well-known Buddhist teacher. So yeah, you've got one up on her there.
Yeah, that's funny, Dad.
Okay, I'm going to send a message to everybody. I'm going to actually close the rooms in 1 minute. Are you able to stick around and hear the discussion?
Yeah, sure. I should probably turn my camera off because I look
Okay.
crazy.
I think you look great. Anyway,
Thanks.
it's fine. All right. Hey, okay, good. I see a few smiles. That's a good sign. All right, so now comes the best part. The best part of the evening is the discussion. Now, it's quite possible that we've lost a few people, but I just want to say this is really where we get to process all this dry stuff that I've been presenting earlier. So I'd love to kick it off by asking someone here to share maybe a few comments, something that you heard in your smaller discussion. We've got about 15 minutes for a group discussion here now, and I think it's really important for me to hear what you're thinking and for you all to process everything that we've discussed tonight. So if you're able to stick around for the remaining 15 minutes, for me, this is the best part. So anyone willing to share, something from the group, either, something they heard from someone else, and just, please don't share your own experience and repeat what you shared with your group. Just maybe a takeaway or two from your smaller discussion. Listen.
Yeah. I'll say that a theme that came up for all of us was around connecting in nature or like places that have deep history as well, like ancestral places as well. It's a key to tuning in. And we also were really talking about the idea of integral also needing to include embodiment and integrating through our physical bodies and selves, not just in our brains and in our like transcendent spirit space.
Fantastic point. Yes. I think I tend to be pretty cerebral. I think you know that about me, but that's
really.
That's just me though. And you bring so much to this community, and the idea of embodying and just bringing everyone's gifts to what we're doing is part of the integral experience. So thank you for sharing that. Someone else, I'd love to hear what you're thinking. I'm sure you had some good group discussions. Let me hear what was something you heard or talked about. Vaughn, thank you. And then Rachel. Oh, Rachel, you're already off mute, so go ahead. Either one, go ahead.
Go ahead, Vaughn.
People talked about being in nature and also singing together or making music together in a group and how that could carry you away. It could be spiritual and or just singing or dancing by yourself even in your room. And the thing that just blew me away was one person talked about being going swimming at night with a group of people where there was bioluminescence, and that reminded someone else of being outside in the far north and seeing the Arctic lights. Is that what you call them? I forget.
Aurora Borealis.
Yeah, that.
Yes.
So now I'm just imagining.
Yes. Something that you remind me of, a word that's so important to me that I didn't even mention tonight. The experience of awe, A-W-E. That's huge. Okay, thank you. You get it. Someone else. I'm dying to hear. Oh yeah, Rachel, go ahead. I really want to hear what you were going to say.
Oh, well, there were just two of us, and but we were talking about, I guess this is sort of on the order of a request, but the having a specific meditation to go with each soul trait that we study in Mussar, that would be really helpful, because meditation is a part of Mussar. It's a part of the practice. But being able to focus in that way, in a meditation might be really helpful in practicing Mussar. But we also talked about experiences in nature and experiences just in life of just feeling the presence when you need the presence,
Good word, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. All right, someone else. I'm dying to hear some other perspectives.
Don't die, Rabbi.
Yes. Wait, say that again?
It was a joke. I said, don't die.
Oh, okay.
You keep saying, I'm dying to hear them
Right.
die. Don't die. Sorry.
Cal,
Jewish humor.
Chip, can you wrap up our little group?
Cal's got his hand up there too.
Oh, Cal, go first.
Oh, great. Yes, Cal.
Sure. Yeah, I was just gonna say, well, that's funny. I don't even know how to put my hand down at this point. One thing our group talked about was that we kind of brought up different spiritual experiences that somebody could have, and that, everybody interprets it in their own way based on their religion or how they're brought up or what they know already. And that it seems like integral theory is somehow trying to get to the core of those experiences outside of how they're interpreted. And so I was just talking about how I think that this course could be a great way to learn more about that and try to understand what that universal human experience of awe and spirituality is, even if we get underneath the religious practices that sometimes get in the way.
Boom, right on. That's really, that gets to where I'm going with this. And I want to mention here, because I was going to save this for the end, but so I don't forget. If you're able to stick with us for next week, what I plan to do is introduce a practice, a meditation practice that will be a way of really of putting all this theory into practice, of actually making it real, reifying it. So it's not just theoretical.